What's up, everyone? Vinny Musso from Musso Athletics here for day 28 of our 30 days of force, so really in the home stretch now. Again, in focusing on our last 10-day cycle of the 30 days of force by talking about force production, specifically strength and power. If you have just kind of hopped on board with the whole series, I suggest starting back at the beginning. A lot of these videos build off of one another, so starting at the beginning and watching each one in succession will kind of help you understand everything that we've been explaining, taking us up to this point. So again, the last 10 days talking about force production, specifically strength and power, and still talking about, kind of going into more detail about kind of the concept of power. So over the past couple of days, we've talked about the force velocity curve. In yesterday's video, we had that big chart up kind of showing different percentages of or different amounts of force being produced at different speeds, and talking about whether that falls under absolute strength, strength speed, power, speed strength speed, things like that. So again, if you haven't seen that yet, I highly suggest going back and taking a look at that one. But if you remember a few videos ago, kind of when we introduced the concept of force production, we talked about briefly the concept of recruitment. And we've talked about recruitment before, specifically in terms of isometrics, recruitment of muscle fibers. So while isometrics are big with that, we'll go into more detail kind of about how that relates to force production, but how also that our isometrics and our force redirection aspect of training ties in with our force production part of training as well. So for talking about recruitment in terms of force production, a good way to think about it is 0 to 100. So we've talked about that again in our force redirection part, where we're talking about going from 0 to 100 or 100 to 0. Basically, the body's ability to turn your muscles off and then quickly turn them back on. For a 0 to 100 concept in the recruitment part of our force production part of this series, we can really focus on, again, at 0 to 100, or basically turning your muscles, or going from your muscles being off to your muscles being on, at basically, maximum capacity, maximum power. So that's what we'll talk about. So when we're training to really work on our muscle recruitment for force production, we really want to take out the counter movement during our exercises in the weight room. We'll have some exercises at the end of this video kind of showing that concept. But if you think of, even if you think of any weightlifting movement or athletic movement, pretty much all of them involve, an eccentric movement or, a lowering movement, that amortization phase, or that switching from absorption to production. So pretty much any movement we do in a weight room or the athletic field has that. If you think of a squat, you go down, that's your eccentric. At the bottom, when you transition, that's your amortization phase, and then you go back up, and that's your force production. Bench press, same thing. When we lower, that's eccentric. Then we have that point of transition. Then we go to producing force. Jumping. Swinging your arms down to go up before you jump. Kind of going off of one foot when you kind of dip yourself down before you jump up. So you can see, a lot of these movements, whether it is in the weight room or on the athletic field, have kind of all spectrums of movement. When we're really trying to focus on recruitment in terms of force production, a really good way to do that is to take the counter movement out. The reason being, if you guys remember back in day 6, we talked about Golgi tendon organs and muscle spindles. So again, if you haven't seen that, I highly suggest going back and taking a look at that one. But if you remember, if you have watched it, our muscle spindles are kind of like a self-defense mechanism in the body, where they will detect kind of how quickly a muscle is changing length, and based on that, if it's changing length, rather rapidly or extending, very rapidly, your brain will kind of turn on and say, okay, I think this muscle's about to tear, so I'm gonna have the spinal cord send a signal, or it's not really the brain, it's the reflex happens in the spinal cord. But again, that muscle is lengthening. There's a signal sent to the spinal cord sends the signal back to the muscle to contract. Because again, the body thinks that rapid lengthening of that muscle is going to cause it to tear. So that, again, that mechanism is to have the muscle contract and prevent it from tearing. So we talked about the concept of how we want to teach the body to recruit this reflex more than our GTOs, which essentially turn the muscle off. So again, take a look at day 6 as we go into a lot of detail about those. But what we're doing when we take out our cardio movement, so again, if we're training, a squat, so instead of, going down and up in a typical squat, we start our squat on a box. Instead of bench pressing down and up, we start our bench press either resting on the chest or on the pins just off of the chest. If we're working on plyometrics, jumping, instead of swinging our arms down, pulling ourselves down to the ground before we go up, we start in that bottom position, or better yet, we start from a seated position where there's no tension on the muscles, and then we go and try to jump as high as we can. So again, we're basically going from 0 to 100, back to that concept. So when we're sitting, on the box, squatting, whether it's goblet or a back squat, again, sometimes when we are doing those movements in the weight room, the down and up squat, the down and up bench, the down and up jump, we are recruiting that muscle spindle reflex. So yes, we are producing force, but in a way we're kind of producing it reflexively. And if we take that counter movement out, so we go basically from no tension on the muscles to producing maximum force possible, then we really are maximizing our muscle recruitment and our ability to essentially go from resting to maximum power, maximum force production. And again, the videos at the end will show this, some examples again of, instead of doing the full movement of a squat or a jump, we kind of take out that lowering point, or that lowering part. So we take the muscle spindle reflex out of it, and we're just solely focusing on going from zero muscle recruitment in a resting position to recruiting a lot of muscle fibers and having those muscle fibers essentially fire at their maximum capacity and their maximum force production. Now, the nice thing about this, you might be asking, well, what's the benefit of taking that muscle spindle reflex out? Because we talked about in day 6 how it's important to have that firing as opposed to our GTOs, which shut the muscle down. So if we train in a way where we take out the counter movement and we bypass our muscle spindle reflex, that will lead to, when we are on the court or the field or whatever sport you're playing, that will actually lead to a greater muscle spindle reflex during that sport. Again, since we've essentially maximized our ability to go from 0 to 100, so let's say prior to training in this fashion where I take out counter movements, your maximum power output, we won't worry about the labels of power and force production. We'll just call it we'll say 100 units. So before working on non-counter movement exercises in the weight room, your max power output in a kind of a counter movement jump where you go down and up is, let's say it's 100 units. Okay, just to keep the numbers simple and the label simple. After going through our non-counter movement training, where we take the counter movement out and we're really just teaching the muscles to go from 0 to full recruitment and maximum recruitment, that has the potential to raise your maximum power output with your muscle spindle reflex from 100 units to 105 units, then 110, 115, 120. So by taking this out, taking the muscle spindle reflex out during training and just focusing on the force production part of that reflex, we're not using the reflex, we're just focusing on the contraction part of the muscle, that in turn leads to a greater potential for a greater, more forceful contraction of that reflex when we actually do want it, on the sporting field and whatever athletic event you're participating in. So hopefully that makes sense. And kind of on that similar note, especially of recruitment, it builds from our isometrics. So if you remember, one of the two of the key benefits of isometric training is it teaches the body to recruit more muscle fibers at that length and recruit those muscle fibers quickly and more efficiently. So that is definitely good. We definitely want that part of training. But since isometrics don't really involve muscle movement, so we're not working on contraction, there's no power involved there. There's no velocity because we're not moving. We're just holding that contraction. So that is where this part of our training builds off of our isometrics. Because if you think about it, during the isometrics that we do in a force redirection part of our training phase, we teach the muscle to recruit more fibers and recruit them, quickly, more efficiently. So we take that increased number of muscle fibers and that increased efficiency of recruiting them, and now we teach those muscles, the increased number of fibers that we can recruit, we teach them to fire more explosively. So you can see how, adding up, so now we've added, increased muscle fiber recruitment, increased efficiency of muscle fiber recruitment, and then increased power output from those, new muscle fibers that we are recruiting, that we've taught ourselves to recruit more and more efficiently through our isometrics. So, it's just one thing building and adding on top of another. So again, we increase the amount of fibers that we recruit, how efficiently we recruit them, and then we take that newfound ability that our body has and teach that to fire more explosively. So if you take all of that, throw it together, that is where we get, that greater muscle spindle reflex and just overall greater, force output, force production from an athlete on the field. Okay, so again, hopefully that all makes sense. I know it can sound kind of confusing at times. If you want, definitely take a look at the video again. But again, the main takeaway from today's video in terms of recruitment for force production is we are teaching our body to, go from zero muscle recruitment to maximum muscle recruitment and maximal power output from those muscles. And by teaching the body to do that, we increase its capacity to create overall force, in athletic movements. Okay. So again, that's the main takeaway from today's video. So again, take a look at a couple of the exercise demonstrations at the end here, and in a few moments, and it'll show that concept of training without counter movement. So we'll see a squat where instead of going down and up through the whole squat movement, start on the bench with the weight, and then from there we just drive up. Okay, we'll see that with squats. We'll see that with rear foot elevated split squats, where I actually start my back knee on the ground. So instead of keeping that back knee elevated off the ground where my muscle's kind of always on tension, I rest my back knee on the ground so that front leg is relaxed, and then I go from relaxed to driving up as hard as I can with the weight. So we see that, with our weighted movements, our resistance movements, and we can also do it with, our more explosive plyometric movements. So you'll also see me performing a seated box jump. Well, not just a seated jump, I don't actually jump up onto a box, but I start seated on the bench. Again, body completely relaxed, no tension, so my body's essentially at 0, and I go to 100. Because from that seated position, I'm not pulling myself down. I'm going from that bottom position to jumping up as explosively as I can. So we see that with a squat jump. We'll see it with a lunge jump where I start my back knee on the ground. Again, instead of your typical lunge jump where you kind of start the arms up, pull yourself down, and then jump up. And the exercise that I demonstrate, my back knee starts on the ground. So again, my body's essentially at 0, and then I go to 100. Okay, so those exercises are the good demonstrations of that concept of training without a counter movement. Okay, and the other really nice thing about this kind of training and some of the exercises that I show, we can essentially work these in with all of those different training styles that we talked about yesterday. So if you remember, we talked about absolute strength, strength, speed, power, speed, strength. These movements can all be done, based on the resistance that you use, can all be used, throughout that scale. Okay, so again, another, really, effective training method to really, get our full athletic capability, whether you're training yourself or again training someone else, for some type of sporting event. Okay, so that'll do it for the talking part of today's video. Again, stay tuned and take a look at a couple of the exercises to kind of demonstrate this concept of no counter movement training. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and take a look at Amuso Athletics on Instagram if you haven't had the chance yet. We have more training content, more training info on that page. Thanks a lot for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.